Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're gonna have another Q&A session. We have a whole bunch of questions. Most of them come from yesterday's video and they are related to watering, fertilizing and so on. I want to address those questions, but we do have a few more from earlier this week. So let's get through them as fast as possible and hopefully we're gonna finish all that I have saved here on my phone. One of my viewers says that in their area they can only find pH down for aquariums as a product to control pH and if they can use it. To be fully honest, I've never used it when I had aquariums, but I think it's okay. That product theoretically should be made to be safe for fish and other live animals that you have in your aquarium and also safe for plants. So I do believe it's safe, but always try new stuff with one plant and see how it goes. It's the safest approach. But of course, if any of you have more experience with this, let us know down below in the comment section so we can all learn more. Etana is asking if she can use shredded microfiber instead of sphagnum moss or synthetic moss. Yes, you can absolutely use it. I used it in some setups a year and a half ago or so, and I discovered it has advantages and disadvantages. I still consider it to be the best replacement for synthetic, but for a more extended video on my thoughts and experience with that, check the description down below. I will add my final video on the project. I'm currently not using microfiber anymore, not because it's not working, but because I don't like algae. Angela is asking if after a flush, do I add more plain water or do I refill the reservoir with fertilized water? That's a good question. I can't believe I didn't say anything in my yesterday's video. I do refill it with fertilized water. I flush with tap water, as you can imagine, and then I dump it out, and I don't want to leave my plants in tap water, so I do refill it with the typical fertilized water, the osmosis water. Brenda is saying that she lives in a northern environment and it can get really cold, so she's asking if her Vanda can do okay in her environment. Well, if you intend to keep her outside, no, she will not do great in winter. Vandas generally are warm to hot growers and they do appreciate warmth. So in the winter time you can absolutely bring your Vanda inside. If you're warm enough and cozy in your home, she will be as well. Try to provide as much light as possible and as warm temperatures as possible. Don't go overboard, don't put it in front of the heater. But you know what I'm saying. Vandas really dislike cold actually. Another viewer is asking how much fertilizer do I actually use in winter, because I said in the summertime I tend to fertilize more. And I think I did talk about this last winter or last spring. It's the same thing as in semi-hydro. I fertilize up to 100 parts per million in winter time and not as frequent. And I do this because my growing space gets cooler. It doesn't get way too cold, but of course much cooler than in summertime when it's pretty hot. So the metabolism and growth rate slows down dramatically. Some of my orchids I don't fertilize at all because they're in their winter break or dormancy. Catasetums, they don't get fertilizer. Dendrobium nobilis, they don't get fertilizer. As for the others, I fertilize very little because in winter I do get salt buildup if I overdo it. So just very little fertilizer, up to 100 parts per million, not more than that. And I fertilize every 2 weeks, every month, depending on the orchid. In the depth of winter, I can see that little white stuff building up. So I'd rather not fertilize too much or at all. Samantha is asking if plastic is better than clay because the roots don't get stuck. Well, that's a relative question. In my opinion, nothing is better than something, because in some environments and for some people, some other stuff are better. But for you, other things might be better. So the clay pots are actually the most traditional and oldest type of pots in which orchids were kept. They have many benefits and many disadvantages. One of the main benefits is that the roots breathe. This can be very beneficial in some environments, some climates, and for some people who tend to water maybe a little bit more. In other environments, they are detrimental, such as mine, because they breathe too much. I need something to retain more water. So I use plastic. And yes, to plastic, roots don't really get as attached as to clay. But there are other benefits which might be more important than root attachment for some people. As you can see, there is also the issue of buildup, of all sorts of not very aesthetic or pleasing to the eye buildup. This is another thing I personally dislike, but of course the benefits might be greater than a little bit of aesthetic issue. It just depends on what you want, how things work, and so on. I just don't believe there is something better than something else. For me, this is bad. This is very bad. But I'm sure that for some other people, maybe in more northern climates than mine, these are lifesavers. Carol is saying that she has a Phalaenopsis which has great roots, a very small crown, and has lost its leaves. Any advice? Well, it can be either crown rot, either stem rot. It's really hard to tell. Either way, check the description down below. I will add my video of how to treat crown rot if that's the problem. If it is stem rot, sadly I don't have a good recipe for that because it's actually pretty hard to decide where do you treat with stem rot. Where did the infection start? From here? From here? Well, this is a short stem. Let's imagine it was longer. Where do we need to treat? Do we need to treat anything? Should I go for a systemic fungicide? Which maybe you should. I don't like very toxic stuff, but that's just me. Doesn't mean it's a better approach or anything. Also, how much of the stem is damaged? Is it just the first part or the last part? What exactly did we lose? Did we lose anything? And as a final thought, if it is actually very advanced, the orchid can still have roots, but the upper part can be completely gone, case in which you cannot really do anything. If the core, if the stem is gone, pretty much everything is gone. Orchids are slow to react to anything, so you can actually have good roots and a dead orchid practically. I'm hoping that is not the case, and I wish you good luck. Catgrass is saying they love the MSO fertilizer, but they use the liquid form and they seem to go through it pretty fast. And they're asking me which is more advantageous, the powder form or the liquid form. I would have to say always, and with any type of fertilizer, the powder form is a lot more economical because it gives it the possibility to be very concentrated. In a liquid form, there is so much you can prepare to have a stable formulation. You cannot make it like super concentrated. You cannot dilute whatever is in here into 500 liters or 1 liter. It's too much. So yes, if you have issues with running too fast out of fertilizer, definitely I would suggest you try the powder version. The liquid form is actually advantageous for those of you who don't have big collections. Because powder forms, they're not holy grails necessarily, they are very water absorbent, and at some point if you don't close the lid properly on your product, they might actually spoil due to the humidity and the fact that they absorb the humidity. And of course, if you have a big tub for 3 orchids, you're not gonna have time to finish the product and it might spoil before you finish it, and that's just a waste. So the liquid form might be better for you because it just, you go through it faster and at least it doesn't spoil due to humidity. But if you have a big collection such as I, the granular form is the way to go. Retired Stitcher has 2 questions for us. One, how do I keep my Cat-Lair stems so clean? Their Cat-Lairs have that papery outer skin. They also say they keep the stems that have past blooms, and if I keep them too. Not entirely sure what you mean by that, but let's first address the paper stuff. This sheath, once it's dry, you can absolutely remove it. Maybe this is not, oh, here we go. You can absolutely remove it, and it's actually beneficial to do so because it can harbor little pests, and for some people it's not pleasing to the eye. So this is how I clean the stems when the sheaths are dry. Never try to peel them off when they're green because you will damage the orchid. And about the stems that bloomed, if you refer to this little stem, I usually cut it. This is just me being lazy. I didn't even repot this orchid. Well, lazy. I have stuff to do, but sometimes I just like to sit down. So I just cut these from here after they're dry yet again. And if you do these 2 things, then the Cat-Lairs might actually appear a little bit cleaner, a little bit better looking. You're also saying that my Cat-Lairs bloom at a very young age and you have to wait for many years for them to bloom. Okay, again, I'm not sure what you refer to, so I'll just try to answer in many different ways. The Cat-Lairs that you find on the market, which already have blooms, they're mature. They can bloom at any time if they're not stressed, if they're in perfect health, if you give them the proper conditions, the warmth, the light, and that's so important for Cat-Lairs. After my experience with them outside, oh my goodness, I'm only gonna keep my cats outside. They grow so much faster, so much more directions of growth, and they just bloom better outside. So with a mature Cat-Lair which bloomed once, you can rest assured it will bloom again. If you have to wait a few years in between blooms with your already mature Cat-Lairs, you have issues. Whether care issues, whether stress issues, I'm not sure, you need to check it out. The stress factors are loss of roots, dehydration, loss of pseudobulbs, loss of leaves. These are all very important and actually core structures for this orchid. Never cut these canes. They will never bloom again, but they serve as reserves of nutrients and water and so on. Never move around and mess around with the root system. This is a soft spot for Cat-Lairs. Try to damage the root system as less as possible. Do your repotting, but just be careful with the roots. I currently use an organic medium just so I don't need to even hassle with the roots. There are many things to talk about here, but one of the reasons why your Cat-Lair might not bloom is stress. If it produces a big growth and then the next growths are tinier, your orchid is stressed by something. You need to figure out what. If it's okay, it produces large growths, but it simply doesn't bloom, most often than not, it is actually a light issue. These are very high light plants, and I would go as far as to say they're Vanda type light plants. I know everybody says, oh, Vandas like a lot of light. In my experience with the outside world, Vandas are more sensitive to sun than Cat-Lairs. I don't have one burn on the Cat-Lair. I still got a little hint of a burn on a Vanda. What can you do? So Cat-Lairs are very, very high light orchids. They can be grown in lower light as well. They will just perform a little slower, a little worse. They're not gonna die on you. They will probably have more vegetation than flowers, but yeah, I hope this helps. Check the stress level and the light. And of course the temperature should be warm, but I think you're okay with temperature. Just check the light. Terry's asking if my outside dendrobiums get rained on or do I shelter them in any way? And well, I grow my orchids on a terrace. I don't have open skies. I just have concrete above me, which can be bad, but sometimes good as well. I do keep my dendrobiums on the edge of the terrace, so yes, they do get rain on. However, it just doesn't rain here in the warm months. It stops raining pretty much altogether in April or May, and then we see rain in October, so they really don't have time to get wet. Sometimes I go with the hose and just spray them down because they get very dusty, and that's it. But I wouldn't shelter them unless I would have rain for like 3 days, continuous rain. Yes, I would definitely shelter them. But whatever little droplets I might get in the summertime here, they just fall and completely evaporate. There's no such thing as rain here, so I don't have to shelter them. Nancy is saying she has a Phalaenopsis which was in bloom in June, and if I think it will grow another flower spike this winter or next summer. Well, the standard Phalaenopsis orchids are actually spring bloomers or winter bloomers. I do have a video on how to rebloom a Phalaenopsis orchid. It's the easiest thing. Check it down below, I'll add it. So I think that if your orchid produced leaves and it has spaces in between the leaves and available eye to produce a flower spike, then it will produce a flower spike if you provide the cool down. If it didn't grow any leaves and all of the eyes that can support a flower spike are occupied, they've already bloomed, it might not bloom. It depends. I think you should just try to provide that cool down that you learn about in the video, and with a bit of luck, it can bloom. Also, if you have the spike still, it might create a secondary spike. But that's a different story. It doesn't mean it will create a new flower spike. Phil is asking, how do they get the roots to slow down growth? Because they're becoming a little bit of a nuisance. Well, in my opinion, there is no safe and good way to slow down roots, and I don't think you should even try it. Roots are always a good sign on orchids. Without roots, you cannot have a healthy orchid. The more roots, the better, because accidents happen. What if you lose the roots inside the pot? What if they rot? What if they're eaten by snails? You're gonna have the aerial roots to support the orchid. And if you have a big Phalaenopsis orchid, 2-3 roots will not be enough to support it. You need more than that. So I know they can be unruly, but if you try to like them, maybe you're gonna like them because they are really, really useful. To try and slow them down, I think you'll have to use some growth stunters, which we talked about these days. They're not good. They're not a good idea with orchids if you don't know what you're doing, at least. And trying means such as planting orchids in very tiny pots, it will not work. These are not bonsai. They're gonna swirl that little pot and just come through the top and take over the shelf once again. You cannot stop the roots from growing, and I don't think you should try to. Roots are always beneficial. From too many roots to too little roots, Mala is saying their Phalaenopsis did not create any aerial root, and why that is? Well, it's not a rule they should create aerial roots. If your Phalaenopsis wants to put her roots inside the medium, that's perfectly fine. It doesn't mean anything. Not all of the orchids will go crazy with roots in the air, or at least they're not gonna do it right now. Maybe later, you never know. So it's okay, you don't have to have aerial roots on your Phalaenopsis. Renee is asking if I have proportions for the terrestrial mix that I make. Oh boy, this is one of those questions that makes me realize that sometimes I might not do a good job with my videos. I think Michael here on YouTube said there are two types of growers, ones who go by numbers and the other ones who go just by intuition. I'm in the second camp. I go by intuition. I never liked math. So if I can get away without measuring stuff, I'll do it. Okay, proportions. I really don't know. Maybe it's about 60% bark, 40% this coconut coir thing, but I'm not sure. What I do is put some bark and then, oh, let's put a little bit of this as well, and then put bark again, and then let's put a little bit of coconut again, and then let's see if it drains. It drains perfect, and that's it. And this is an absolutely horrible thing to do if you try to make educational videos, so I will try to get a little better with proportions and things of the sorts. It's weird. I love statistics and my life is driven by statistics, but I don't like to measure stuff. A safe percentage would be 70% bark, 30% coconut coir, but do test to see if it drains. If the water pools and stays there, it's too much coconut coir. You need to remove some. And at some point, I do believe that everybody can get into the rhythm of not even measuring anything and just doing a proportion based on what you see. That's what I do. I don't know if it's native or if it's experience, but I do believe everybody can do this. But I will try to be better with proportions and measurements. Chani has a question related to what I said in a video. I said something like, after a month, I'm gonna go back and unpot the orchid and cut away the roots that died. I will actually make a video out of this. You know how there are those new orchids with a ton of roots and you don't know which one is alive? Pretty much they all seem okay, and you pot it and within a month or two it starts to smell, something appears to go wrong with the orchid, and well, that's because those roots were either sick or not alive in the first place, either they did not adapt to the medium you used. And it happened to me so many times, and especially with those very bushy rooted Oncidium orchids or the Cat-Lair orchids. I pot them with apparently a good root system, and then something starts to smell bad, and I check the root system and most of it is dead. So I kind of know these orchids when I see them. When I see that bushy root system, I know, oh, I need to cut it at some point. So because I don't know which one will still remain alive or not, or how the orchid will evolve, I leave whatever roots I consider they're okay. I pot the orchid, and then after a month, not months, after a month, I go back, I unpot the orchid and cut away whatever died. Chani is also asking if this happens in any medium or it's an inorganic thing. In any medium. I've had this happen for years now. I'm not sure if I ever mentioned it in my balcony days when I used to use bark in organic medium. I think I mentioned it once. At some point I went as far with the Cat-Lairs as to cut away all of the old roots and just leave the previous growth roots, and that's it, because it was driving me insane at some point. So we'll make a video out of this, but yeah, whenever I see lots of roots on an orchid, I just know there's more work. The story did not end there. 1 month later, I need to intervene. One of my viewers is asking how many minutes you need to wait after spraying hydrogen peroxide. You don't need to wait. The most important thing is the initial reaction. The first few seconds are the most, let's say, intense ones. That's all you want. Afterwards, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to rinse. You just put the orchid in the medium. As it's fizzing, that's okay. Put the medium around it, and by the time you're done and get to water again, all of the fungal spores and everything are gone. So no waiting involved. The first few seconds are the most important ones. And that's it for today's Q&A. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you have questions, you can always leave them down below in the comment section, and I'll try to get back to you either with a comment or a video. So you know the drill. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun related subjects. And if you like YouTube to notify you whenever I upload a new video, just turn on notifications for my channel. And with that said, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye!